The old house across the street had been empty for as long as I could remember. It was a local legend, the kind of place kids dared each other to touch the front door of on Halloween. So, you can imagine my surprise when a moving truck pulled up one crisp autumn morning. I watched from my window, coffee in, and as a couple, probably in their late 30s, directed the movers. They were the Millers, as I'd later learned from the mailman. He said they were a quiet couple, looking for a peaceful life away from the city. And quiet they were. In fact, after that first day, we barely saw them at all. The moving truck left. The lights in the house would turn on at dusk and off around 10, but the Millers themselves were ghosts. No one ever saw them leave for work, get the mail, or even just sit on their porch. The curtains were always drawn. My wife, Sarah, thought it was strange. Maybe they're just really private people, I'd say, trying to be reasonable. But even the most private people have to go get groceries, right? Weeks turned into a month, and the mystery of the Millers became a quiet topic of conversation on our sleepy suburban street. Then, the knocking started. It was faint at first, so faint I thought I was imagining it. It always began around midnight, a rhythmic, muffled sound. Thump dot dot dot, thump dot dot, dump dot dot. It seemed to be coming from across the street, from the direction of the Miller's house. I mentioned it to Sarah, but she's a heavy sleeper and hadn't heard a thing. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the old house settling, or a loose pipe, or 100 other rational things. But the sound was too deliberate, too consistent. It wasn't the random creak of an old house. It was a pattern. A desperate, rhythmic beat that seemed to emanate from deep underground. It sounded like it was coming from their basement. One night, the knocking was louder than ever. It echoed in the stillness of our bedroom, pulling me from a deep sleep. Thump, dot, 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 thump, dot, dot, dot. Thump, dot, dot. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. This was not normal. I got up and walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the house across the street. All was dark except for a single, dim light glowing from a small basement window, one I'd never noticed before. The knocking seemed to sync with a faint flicker from that window. It felt like a signal. Was someone trying to communicate? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Were the Millers okay? Was someone in that house against their will? The mailman had said they were a quiet couple, but this was more than quiet. It was complete isolation. The next morning, I decided I had to do something. I felt a bit foolish, like a nosy neighbor from a sitcom, but the worry was gnawing at me. I walked across the street, my steps feeling unnaturally loud on the silent pavement. I stood on their porch for a long moment, hesitating, before finally ringing the doorbell. I waited and waited. Nothing. I rang it again, then knocked, my knuckles rapping against the solid wood door. The silence, from inside the house, was absolute, defeated. I turned to leave, but as I stepped off the porch, I heard it. A faint, scraping sound from the side of the house, near that basement window. I crept around the overgrown bushes, my heart thudding against my ribs. The small, grimy window was set low into the foundation. As I got closer, I saw that the glass was covered in dirt, but something had been scratched into the grime from the inside. I knelt down, wiping away a layer of dust on the outside of the glass to see more clearly. My breath caught in my throat. It was a word scratched over and over again into the dirt-caked pane. Help. I didn't think twice. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. I explained the situation. The silent neighbors, the nightly knocking, the message on the window. I probably sounded like a lunatic, but thankfully, the dispatcher took me seriously. She said a patrol car was on its way. The wait for the police felt like an eternity. I stood on my own lawn, watching the Miller's house, half expecting something to happen, for the front door to burst open. But there was only silence. The house stood there, a dark and imposing secret in the middle of our ordinary neighborhood. When the police arrived, 2 officers got out, and I quickly recounted everything I knew. They approached the house with caution, their expressions serious and professional. They knocked, announced themselves, and after getting no response, they made the decision to force entry. I watched from a distance as they pried open the front door and disappeared inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back out. His face was pale. He said they had found the Millers in the main part of the house. They were fine, a little bewildered, but completely unaware of what had been happening right beneath their feet. It turns out the Millers were extreme agoraphobics, a condition that made them terrified of leaving their home. They had everything delivered and communicated with the outside world only through the internet. They had bought the old house specifically for its isolation, but they hadn't been the only occupants. The previous owner, a reclusive old man, had passed away in the house years ago, but his brother, who had severe developmental disabilities and had been his dependent, had been forgotten by the system. He had been living in a hidden, fortified room in the basement, surviving on canned goods he had hoarded. He was terrified of the new noises upstairs and had been knocking for weeks, hoping someone, anyone, would hear him. The man was gently coaxed out by the officers and specialists who were called to the scene. He was frail and disoriented, but physically unharmed. He was taken to a hospital to be cared for, finally safe after years of being hidden away. The Millers were horrified. They had no idea someone was trapped in their home. The basement had been sealed off before they bought the property, and they just assumed it was an old cellar. They felt immense guilt, but were also grateful that the man was finally getting the help he desperately needed. The knocking stopped. Of course, the nights in our neighborhood returned to their familiar, peaceful silence. But I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that rhythmic, desperate sound in the dead of night, or the single word scratched into a dirty window pane. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't stories or legends, but the real hidden struggles happening right under our noses, in the quietest corners of the most ordinary places. It taught me to always trust my instincts, and to never, ever ignore a knock in the dark. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If this story gave you chills, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more mysteries. Stay safe, and always look out for your neighbors.